1960s, Birmingham, Alabama was considered by many to be the front line of the ascendant civil rights movement. There, activists faced down water cannons, police dogs, and spent long nights in crowded prisons in an effort to have their voices heard. During those tumultuous days, one voice rose above the rest. Armed with a microphone and radio frequency, a DJ named Shelley Stewart played a central role in the struggle for racial equality. He's the subject of tonight's Real History.
Birmingham, Alabama, 1963, by far had the most harsh Jim Crow laws that anybody could imagine. Birmingham was the most segregated city in America. In the fall of 1962, some of the civil rights movement members in Birmingham, Alabama, invited Dr. King to come to Birmingham to head the demonstrations there. The aim was to march downtown to some of the big department stores and simply have lunch. And Dr. King's method was to get as many people as possible to be arrested so that the jails would be filled up. They called themselves jailbirds. The police department also adopted a tactic in which they would take pictures of the demonstrators and show those pictures to the employers of those people. Well, it got to the point that nobody wanted to go to jail anymore. The movement had stagnated in Birmingham. Shelley Stewart was a disc jockey on one of the black radio stations in Birmingham. He was the most influential radio personality in the city at that time, black or white. Shelley, of course, knew Dr. Martin Luther King. He had worked with him in the demonstrations for a couple of years. One morning, Shelley was standing in front of his record store. Dr. King and Andrew Young were walking up the street, and they stopped and greeted each other. Dr. King mentioned that he was having trouble gathering jailbirds, and Shelley suggested he go down to the pool halls, some of the black restaurants, the only black hotel in Birmingham, that he would be able to gather plenty of folks there who were accustomed to getting arrested. They weren't afraid of it at all. And Dr. King did that. Shelley also suggested that he would be able to turn out the school kids of Birmingham because he had a great rapport with them. He was able to get those student leaders into a meeting, and they told him what they had in mind. And in May of 1963, Shelley turned out the children of Birmingham. The kids ranged in age from about 6 years all the way up to 18 or 19. And those students showed up at a big rally at the 16th Street Baptist Church. Shelley helped the movement by using code words on the air and by playing certain records. For example, if a particular song by Sam Cooke was played, then that meant the demonstration was to go down a certain street and avenue toward downtown. He went on the radio and said, "Be sure to wear your raincoats." That was a signal to the kids that the fire hoses were probably going to be used that day. Bring your toothbrush, you were going to spend the night in jail. The second day of the demonstration was when Bull Connor brought out those fire hoses and police dogs. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., President John Kennedy and his brother, Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, were watching what was happening. At that point, the president told Dr. King and the city leaders in Birmingham it was time to go to the negotiating table. After the third day of marching, again turned out by Shelley Stewart, negotiations began in earnest, and by the end of the weekend, they had an agreement. When the demonstrations ended in Birmingham, it was just the beginning, not the end. In September of 1963, the 16th Street Baptist Church, which was one of the key meeting places during the movement, was bombed. 4 little girls were killed in that bombing. But it took almost 40 years before the people who were responsible for that were tried and convicted of that bombing. One of the bombers, Thomas Blanton, was being tried by the U.S. Attorney. Some of the most compelling evidence in that trial came based on the testimony of church worker James Lay. He witnessed 4 men in the vicinity, one of whom was carrying a suitcase. When they realized they were being watched, they ran away. Lay was also one of the first people on the scene the morning of the bombing, and he helped pull those 4 little bodies out of the rubble. His testimony to the grand jury was the most compelling. However, 1 week before the Blanton trial, Lay suffered a serious stroke. He was unable to speak. U.S. Attorney Doug Jones decided to approach someone else to actually read that grand jury testimony. In surveying a list of civil defense workers, he came across a very familiar name, Shelley Stewart. When Shelley got on the stand, he read those words. A hush fell across the courtroom, just the way that Shelley was able to bring life to that eyewitness account. Even the defendant's face fell, and he had a grave expression on his face as he heard Shelley Stewart read those words. Well, Thomas Blanton was convicted, the second of the bombers to be convicted of that heinous act. So here's a man who has done remarkable things, yet very few people realize what he had to overcome to get to that point. Somebody once said, in hearing Shelley's story, Horatio Alger would have given up after the first day. He witnessed the murder of his mother by his father when he was 4 years old. He was homeless, literally, at the age of 5. He also spent some time with some extraordinarily abusive relatives who inflicted some of the worst physical and sexual humiliation you could ever imagine. At his high school graduation, he suffered yet another serious setback. He had had almost perfect grades, yet when he got to graduation, his name was not called for a scholarship. Later, he asked the principal why, and the principal said, "You just don't have a family background to be a college man." Shelley continued to work in radio even though he had no college education. He eventually joined the Air Force. When he witnessed serious racial discrimination, when he went to his commanders to report it and to try to get it changed, they sent him to Air Force psychiatrists. Those psychiatrists told Shelley he was insane. Shelley was able to overcome much of this thanks to two powerful forces. One was his mother. He maintains to this day that she still speaks to him and urges him to do the best he can. The second was a first-grade teacher. She told him that if he would use his brilliant mind and finish his education, he would be able to do great things in life. I believe what makes Shelley Stewart's story so remarkable is it epitomizes how people can use their talents and a lot of hard work to be able to overcome any kind of obstacle and still be able to contribute so mightily